Our journey into the extraordinary life of Charles Dickens begins not in the hallowed halls of literary fame, but amidst the bustling, salty air of Portsmouth, Hampshire. On a cold Friday, February 7th, 1812, Charles John Huffam Dickens drew his first breath in a modest house at 1 Mile End Terrace. He was the second of 8 children born to John and Elizabeth Dickens, a family whose fortunes would swing with a dramatic pendulum, oscillating between fleeting comfort and the stark, unforgiving realities of poverty. This inherent instability, this constant dance between hope and despair, would become the very bedrock of the boy's character and ultimately the wellspring of his unparalleled literary genius. His father, John Dickens, was a clerk in the Navy Pay Office, a man of convivial spirit, a penchant for theatricality and, crucially, a chronic inability to manage his finances. He was, in many ways, the living embodiment of the charming but feckless Mr. Micawber from David Copperfield, a character Charles would later immortalize. Micawber, perpetually waiting for something to turn up, while simultaneously spending far beyond his means, perfectly mirrored John's own optimistic yet reckless approach to life. Elizabeth Barrow, Charles's mother, was a woman of intelligence and ambition, nurturing dreams of opening a school. Yet, like many women of her era, her aspirations were often curtailed by the rigid societal expectations and the harsh financial realities that tethered her to domesticity. The interplay between John's expansive, often reckless optimism and Elizabeth's more grounded, yet ultimately constrained, practicality would leave an indelible mark on their sensitive son, shaping his understanding of human nature and societal pressures. The earliest years of Charles's life were a kaleidoscope of changing scenery, each move dictated by his father's fluctuating employment. From Portsmouth, the family relocated to London in 1815, a city that would soon become the throbbing heart of Dickens's literary universe. Then, in 1817, they moved to Chatham, Kent. It was here, in Chatham, that Charles would experience what he later fondly recalled as his golden age. This period, stretching until 1822, was a time of relative stability and profound happiness. Chatham, with its ancient castle, the bustling dockyards, and the mysterious, mist-shrouded marshes that stretched towards the sea, became a vibrant canvas for his burgeoning imagination. Here, he was free to roam, to observe, and to absorb the rich tapestry of life around him. The amateur theatrical performances his father so loved to stage, the vibrant characters he encountered in the streets, and the sheer joy of discovery all contributed to a burgeoning sense of wonder and a deep appreciation for narrative. As he himself would later write, these were the years when my father had more than once taken me to see the dockyard, and I had seen the ships building, and had been to the top of the tower, and had seen the whole of the Medway and the beautiful country beyond it. Crucially, it was in Chatham that Charles first discovered the transformative power of books. His mother taught him the rudiments of reading, and he devoured the works of 18th-century novelists like Tobias Smollett, Roderick Random, Peregrine Pickle, Henry Fielding, Tom Jones, and Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe. These picaresque tales of adventure, social satire, and vivid characterization fueled his imagination, transporting him far beyond the confines of his childhood home. He would later reflect on these early literary encounters as foundational, stating that they opened a new world to me and made me a child of wonder. This early immersion in storytelling, coupled with his innate observational skills, laid the groundwork for his future as a novelist, imbuing him with a lifelong passion for narrative and character and a profound understanding of the human condition. However, this idyllic period was not destined to last. The family's financial stability, always precarious, began its dramatic unraveling in 1822 when John Dickens was recalled to London. This move signaled a precipitous decline in their fortunes. They settled in increasingly cramped and shabby lodgings in Camden Town, a stark contrast to the relative comfort of Chatham. The cherished books that had been Charles's companions were sold off, one by one, to pawnbrokers to stave off creditors and put food on the table. The boy who had dreamed of becoming a learned and distinguished man was abruptly pulled from school. His formal education curtailed by the harsh realities of his family's escalating debt. His childhood, in essence, was prematurely brought to an end, replaced by the grim spectre of adult responsibility and the gnawing anxiety of impending ruin. The catastrophe reached its devastating climax on February 20th, 1824. John Dickens, unable to repay a debt of £40 and 10 shillings owed to a baker named James Carr, was arrested and incarcerated in the Marshalsea Debtors' Prison in Suffolk. Under the brutal laws of the time, debtors could be imprisoned indefinitely until their debts were settled. The Marshalsea was not merely a prison for the individual, it was a prison for the family. Shortly after John's incarceration, Elizabeth and the younger children joined him within its grim walls, a common practice that allowed families to remain together, albeit in squalor and degradation. The only exception was 12-year-old Charles, whose fate was to be far more solitary and scarring. Instead of joining his family in prison, Charles was sent to work at Warren's blacking factory, located at Hungerford Stairs near the Strand. This was not merely a job, it was a descent into a personal hell, a profound trauma that would haunt him for the rest of his life and become the secret wellspring of much of his literary genius. For 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, Charles toiled in a crazy, tumble-down old house, abutting on the river and overrun with rats. His task was monotonous and soul-crushing, covering pots of boot blacking with oil paper, then blue paper, tying them with string and trimming the edges. For this, he earned a paltry 6 shillings a week, barely enough to cover his lodgings and meagre meals. He described the place with vivid, painful clarity. It was a crazy, tumble-down old house, abutting on the river and overrun with rats. Its walls were so rotten that they seemed to be made of mud and straw, and its floors were so uneven that I often stumbled over them. The psychological impact of this experience was immense. Charles, a sensitive and imaginative boy from a respectable middle-class background, found himself thrust into the company of rough, uneducated labourers. He felt a profound sense of abandonment and shame, believing that his family had cast him aside. The indignity of manual labour, the loss of his childhood innocence, and the crushing realisation of his family's social downfall left an indelible scar. He later confided to his biographer, John Forster, in words that resonate with raw pain, "No words can express the secret agony of my soul as I sunk into this companionship, and felt my early hopes of growing up to be a learned and distinguished man crushed in my breast." This period instilled in him a deep-seated fear of poverty and a fierce determination to achieve financial security and social standing, not just for himself, but for his family. The shame was so profound that he kept this chapter of his life a closely guarded secret for decades, revealing it only to Forster late in life. The blacking factory experience was more than just a personal ordeal. It was a crucible that forged his social consciousness. He witnessed firsthand the brutal exploitation of child labour, the indifference of society to the plight of the poor, and the stark inequalities that underpinned Victorian prosperity. This raw, visceral understanding of suffering would later infuse his novels with an unparalleled authenticity and moral urgency. Characters like Oliver Twist, the orphaned boy forced into a life of crime, and David Copperfield, whose own childhood mirrors Dickens's in many ways, are direct descendants of the boy who worked at Warren's blacking. The themes of social injustice, the dehumanizing effects of industrialization, and the resilience of the human spirit, which would become central to his entire oeuvre, were born in the grime and despair of that riverside factory. As he would later write in David Copperfield, reflecting on the plight of children like himself, "I know enough of the world now to have almost lost the capacity of being much surprised by anything. But it is a matter of some surprise to me, even now, that I can have been so easily thrown away at such an age." Even when a small family legacy eventually allowed John Dickens to pay his debts and secure his release from the Marshalsea in May 1824, Charles's ordeal did not immediately end. His mother, Elizabeth, desperate for the additional income, argued that Charles should remain at the factory. This perceived betrayal was a wound that never truly healed. "I never afterwards forgot, I never shall forget, I never can forget, that my mother was warm for my being sent back," he wrote, revealing the depth of his emotional pain and the lasting impact of this decision on his relationship with his mother. Though his father eventually relented and sent him back to school at Wellington House Academy, the damage was done. The boy who emerged from Warren's blacking factory was no longer just a child. He was a witness, a survivor, and a nascent social critic. The ink on his hands would eventually wash off, but the indelible ink of experience had stained his soul, preparing him for the monumental task of chronicling and critiquing the world around him, a world he now understood with a profound and painful intimacy. The trauma of the blacking factory, though never fully erased, began to recede as Charles Dickens, now a young man, embarked on a path that would, perhaps unexpectedly, lead him back to the world of words. The boy who had felt his early hopes crushed was now driven by a fierce determination to escape the spectre of poverty and to forge a new destiny. His formal education, though abruptly curtailed, had instilled in him a voracious appetite for knowledge and a keen observational eye, qualities that would soon become the unmistakable hallmarks of his literary genius. After his father's release from Marshalsea Prison in May 1824 and a subsequent, albeit brief period of schooling at Wellington House Academy, Charles's journey into the professional world began. In May 1827, at the age of 15, he found employment as a legal clerk at the firm of Ellis and Blackmore. For 2 years, he navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the legal system, a world teeming with arcane procedures, endless paperwork, and often absurd characters. This experience, far from being a mere detour, proved to be an invaluable apprenticeship. He absorbed the nuances of legal jargon, the eccentricities of barristers, and the often tragic plight of those caught in the bureaucratic machinery. These observations would later find vivid and scathing expression in novels like Bleak House, where the interminable case of Jarndyce and Jarndyce satirizes the very system he once served. He saw firsthand how the law, intended to bring justice, could instead ensnare and destroy lives, a theme that would resonate throughout his work. However, the law was not his true calling. Dickens was drawn to the immediacy and dynamism of journalism, a profession that offered a direct engagement with the pulsating life of London. He taught himself Gurney's system of shorthand, a skill he mastered with remarkable speed and precision. And by 1830, he was working as a freelance reporter at Doctors' Commons, the ecclesiastical and admiralty courts. His talent for capturing dialogue, atmosphere, and the essence of human interaction quickly became apparent. He soon progressed to reporting parliamentary debates for the Mirror of Parliament, and later, the more prestigious The Morning Chronicle. This period was a rigorous apprenticeship, honing his ability to observe, record, and dramatize the everyday realities of London life. He crisscrossed the country by stagecoach, often in perilous conditions, reporting on elections and public events, immersing himself in the diverse social strata of Britain. He once famously remarked of his reporting days, "I have been in my time on a good many journeys, but I have never been on one that was not a journey of discovery." Amidst this burgeoning career, Dickens experienced the pangs of first love. Maria Beadnell, the daughter of a banker, captivated the young Charles. Their courtship was passionate, filled with youthful ardor and secret meetings. However, their romance was ultimately doomed. Maria's family, acutely aware of Dickens's humble origins and uncertain prospects, deemed him an unsuitable match. The rejection was a crushing blow, leaving a wound that would fester and influence his portrayal of unrequited love, social ambition, and the pain of class disparity in many of his later works, most notably in the character of Dora Spenlow in David Copperfield and Estella in Great Expectations. He would later revisit Maria, years after their youthful romance, only to find that the idealized image he held had been shattered by reality. a poignant lesson in the deceptive nature of memory and expectation. It was during these formative years that Dickens began to publish his earliest literary efforts. His first published story, A Dinner at Poplar Walk, appeared in the monthly magazine in December 1833. He wrote under the pseudonym Boz, a charming family nickname derived from his younger brother Augustus's mispronunciation of Moses. These early pieces, collected and published as sketches by Boz in two series in 1836 and 1837, offered a kaleidoscopic view of London life. Its bustling streets, its peculiar characters, its hidden corners, and its vibrant social scenes. They were witty, observant, and already displayed the distinctive voice that would soon captivate millions. The sketches were a critical success, signalling the arrival of a fresh and exciting new talent, a writer who could capture the pulse of the city with an almost photographic memory and a deeply empathetic heart. The year 1836 marked a pivotal moment in Dickens's personal and professional life. On April 2nd, he married Catherine Hogarth, the eldest daughter of his editor, George Hogarth. It was a union that promised domestic stability and social advancement, providing him with a respectable foothold in society. Catherine, though perhaps not his intellectual equal, offered companionship and the prospect of a family, something Dickens deeply craved after his own fractured childhood. Shortly after his marriage, a publishing phenomenon began to unfold. Chapman and Hall, a London publishing house, approached Dickens to write accompanying text for a series of sporting illustrations by Robert Seymour. What emerged was the posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club, serialized from April 1836 to November 1837. Initially, sales were modest, and the project seemed destined for obscurity. However, with the introduction of the irrepressible Sam Weller, the witty and loyal Cockney valet, in the fourth installment, the Pickwick Papers became an overnight sensation. Readers clamoured for each new part, eagerly following the misadventures of the benevolent, if naive, Samuel Pickwick and his fellow club members. However, this period of immense joy and burgeoning success was also marked by profound sorrow. In May 1837, Catherine's younger sister, Mary Hogarth, who had been living with the couple and was deeply beloved by Charles, died suddenly at the tender age of 17. Mary was a radiant presence in their home, and her death devastated Dickens. He temporarily halted the serialization of both Pickwick and his next major work, Oliver Twist, a testament to the depth of his grief. Mary's idealized image would forever haunt his imagination, inspiring characters like Little Nell in The Old Curiosity Shop and Rose Maylie in Oliver Twist. Innocent, pure figures whose untimely deaths evoke profound public mourning. This personal tragedy underscored the emotional intensity that fueled his writing, demonstrating how deeply his own experiences were woven into the fabric of his fictional worlds. He would later write of Mary, "She was so good, so beautiful, so amiable, so graceful, so cheerful, so playful, so natural, and so true." With the resounding success of the Pickwick Papers, Charles Dickens had not only found his voice, but had also discovered the immense, almost revolutionary power of his pen. No longer merely a chronicler of urban eccentricities, he began to wield his narrative prowess as a formidable weapon against the social injustices that festered beneath the glittering yet often brutal surface of Victorian England. The boy who had suffered the indignities of the blacking factory and the Marshalsea prison now commanded a vast and eager audience, and he was determined to use this platform to expose the hypocrisy and cruelty he had witnessed firsthand, transforming his personal pain into a powerful engine for social change. His first major assault on the social order came with Oliver Twist, serialized between 1837 and 1839. This was no light-hearted romp through the countryside. It was a stark, unflinching plunge into the brutal realities of poverty, crime, and the infamous New Poor Law of 1834. Dickens dragged his readers into the squalid workhouses where children like the eponymous Oliver were starved, beaten, and exploited. He vividly depicted the grim underbelly of London's criminal underworld, introducing iconic villains who would forever etch themselves into the public consciousness. The manipulative Fagin, the cunning, artful Dodger, and the monstrous, violent Bill Sikes. The story follows Oliver, an orphan born in a workhouse who escapes to London, only to fall into a gang of pickpockets led by Fagin. Oliver's inherent goodness and innocence, despite his horrific circumstances, serve as a powerful indictment of a society that blames its victims. Dickens, through Oliver's journey, challenged the prevailing Malthusian view that the poor were responsible for their own destitution. He forced the comfortable middle classes to confront the misery that existed just beyond their drawing-room windows, revealing the systemic failures that created such widespread suffering. Oliver Twist was a radical departure from the sentimental novels of the era, sparking outrage and debate and cementing Dickens's reputation not just as an entertainer, but as a formidable social critic. As he himself wrote, his intention was to show the abstract idea of good in the young child, assailed by all the evil of the world, but triumphant over it. Following the success of Oliver Twist, Dickens turned his attention to another pressing social ill: the scandalous state of education for the poor. Nicholas Nickleby, serialized from 1838 to 1839, took aim at the notoriously cruel and exploitative Yorkshire boarding schools, particularly those that preyed on unwanted or orphaned children. Through the harrowing experiences of Nicholas and Smike at Dotheboys Hall, presided over by the sadistic, one-eyed Wackford Squeers and his equally cruel wife, Dickens exposed the physical abuse, neglect, and intellectual starvation inflicted upon vulnerable children. The novel's plot follows young Nicholas Nickleby, who, after his father's death, is forced to seek employment and becomes an assistant master at Squeers's school. His efforts to protect the downtrodden Smike, a starved and abused pupil, highlight the themes of compassion versus cruelty, and the power of individual goodness against institutionalized evil. The novel's vivid portrayal of these institutions led to widespread public outcry and contributed significantly to educational reform, demonstrating Dickens's direct impact on policy and public consciousness. He described Squeers as a man who had but one eye, and the popular prejudice runs in favor of two. Dickens's prolific output continued with The Old Curiosity Shop, serialized between 1840 and 1841. This novel, while perhaps less overtly polemical than its predecessors, tapped into the Victorian fascination with innocence and sentimentality, while still carrying a potent social message. The tragic figure of Little Nell, a virtuous and pure child exploited by her gambling grandfather, Daniel Quilp, and pursued by the grotesque dwarf Quilp, captured the hearts of the nation. Her slow, agonizing decline and eventual death provoked an unprecedented outpouring of public grief, with readers reportedly queuing at docks to receive the latest installments, and even Queen Victoria herself said to have wept. The story follows Nell and her grandfather as they flee London to escape Quilp, embarking on a journey through a picturesque but ultimately harsh English countryside. Themes of innocence corrupted, the dangers of vice, gambling, and the vulnerability of the innocent in a harsh, indifferent world are central. While some later critics would find Nell's character overly sentimental, her story served as a powerful reminder of the fragility of childhood and the pervasive threat of urban decay and moral corruption, showcasing Dickens's unparalleled ability to evoke profound emotional responses from his audience. He wrote of Nell, "There is a sanctity in the very name of childhood which makes it a thing to be reverenced." In 1841, Dickens ventured into historical fiction with Barnaby Rudge. Set against the tumultuous backdrop of the anti-Catholic Gordon riots of 1780, the novel explored themes of mob mentality, religious intolerance, and political unrest. The story centers on the simple-minded Barnaby Rudge and his raven, Grip, who become entangled in the violent riots that swept through London. Through characters like the locksmith Gabriel Varden and his family, and the various figures drawn into the chaos, Dickens examined the dangers of fanaticism, and the ease with which public sentiment can be manipulated into destructive forces. While perhaps not as widely read today as his other works, Barnaby Rudge showcased Dickens's versatility and his growing ambition to tackle broader historical and social canvases. It was a testament to his belief that the past held vital lessons for the present, and that the seeds of social injustice were often sown in historical ignorance and prejudice. He meticulously researched the historical events, aiming to portray the riots with a vivid realism that would resonate with contemporary concerns about social unrest. Throughout this incredibly productive period, Dickens was not merely writing. He was living and breathing Victorian London. He was a tireless walker, traversing the city's bustling streets, its opulent squares, and its darkest, most squalid alleys. He observed, he listened, and he absorbed every detail, transforming the raw material of urban life into unforgettable characters and settings. His novels became a living map of London, a social commentary etched into its very bricks and mortar. He gave voice to the voiceless, dignity to the downtrodden, and a mirror to the conscience of a rapidly industrializing society. His personal experiences, particularly the blacking factory and Marshalsea, provided him with an unparalleled empathy for the poor and the marginalized, allowing him to portray their lives with a realism and compassion rarely seen before. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that it was a town of red brick, with black smoke issuing from the chimneys of its factories, and a black canal running through it, and a black river in which the dye of the factories stained the water. By 1842, the name Charles Dickens was no longer merely the celebrated author of England. It was a transatlantic phenomenon. His fame had crossed the vast, churning expanse of the Atlantic, transforming him into a literary sensation in the burgeoning United States. The young nation, still forging its cultural identity and hungry for new narratives, embraced Dickens with an enthusiasm that bordered on hysteria. It was against this backdrop of immense popularity and fervent expectation that Dickens, accompanied by his wife Catherine, embarked on his first American tour, a journey that would profoundly shape his worldview, challenge his ideals, and ultimately fuel some of his most incisive and controversial social commentary. The voyage itself was a trial. A notoriously poor sailor, Dickens found the winter crossing aboard the steamship Britannia to be a most abominable and infernal experience. He described the ship as a heaving, plunging, creaking, straining, groaning, and shivering vessel, a floating prison where he was confined to his small cabin amidst the relentless motion of the sea. Yet even in his misery, his keen observational eye was at work, capturing the details of life at sea that would later find their way into his writings. His arrival in Boston on January 22, 1842, was met with a reception that can only be described as Dickens mania. Crowds thronged the streets, eager to catch a glimpse of the literary titan whose words had already captivated them. Banquets were held in his honor. Prominent figures like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Richard Henry Dana Jr. vied for his attention, and he was hailed as a champion of the common man. The sheer scale of his reception was overwhelming, a whirlwind of public dinners, speeches, and endless handshaking. He wrote home, marveling at the unbounded hospitality and the ardent and earnest welcome he received. "I can do nothing that I want to do, go nowhere that I want to go, and see nothing that I want to see," he wrote, overwhelmed by the constant public scrutiny. "If I turn into the street, I am followed by a crowd." His tour continued in this vein as he traveled to New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. He was impressed by American institutions like the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston, and he praised the energy and ambition of the American people. He saw in the young republic a potential for greatness, a society unshackled from the rigid class structures of England. However, the initial euphoria soon gave way to a growing and profound disillusionment. Dickens, a fierce advocate for social justice in his own country, was appalled by several aspects of American society that clashed sharply with his deeply held moral convictions. Foremost among these was the pervasive and brutal institution of slavery. As he traveled south, his horror grew. He witnessed the degradation of human beings, the casual cruelty of the slave markets, and the deep-seated racism that permeated society. In his own words, he found it to be a most hideous and detestable system. This direct confrontation with such a profound injustice deeply affected him, solidifying his commitment to abolition and human rights. He wrote with righteous indignation in American Notes, "The upholders of slavery in America are the enemies of their own country and of all mankind." He also grew increasingly frustrated by the glaring absence of international copyright laws. American publishers were freely reprinting his works without paying him royalties, a practice he viewed as blatant theft and a profound disrespect for intellectual property. He spoke out publicly on the issue, pleading for a law of international copyright between England and America. But his pleas were met with indifference and even hostility from the American press, who accused him of being greedy. This financial exploitation, coupled with the moral outrage over slavery, began to sour his view of the land of the free. His observations and growing disenchantment found their way into two significant works. The first, American Notes for General Circulation, published shortly after his return to England in 1842, was a non-fictional account of his travels. While it contained some praise for American institutions, it was largely a scathing critique, highlighting the hypocrisy of slavery, the crudeness of public life, particularly the widespread habit of spitting, and the commercial exploitation of authors. The book was met with outrage in America, where Dickens was accused of ingratitude and betrayal. American newspapers launched vicious attacks, and his popularity plummeted. He had dared to hold a mirror up to the young Republic, and the Republic was furious at the reflection. The second, and perhaps more cutting critique came in his novel Martin Chuzzlewit, serialized from 1843 to 1844. Though primarily set in England, a significant portion of the novel satirizes American provincialism, greed, and superficiality through the experiences of young Martin and Mark Tapley. They travel to the fictional settlement of Eden, a mosquito-infested swamp masquerading as a utopian paradise, a direct jab at the speculative land schemes common in America at the time. The story follows Martin Chuzzlewit, a young man disinherited by his wealthy grandfather who travels to America with his companion Mark Tapley seeking fortune. Their disillusionment with the American dream, as they encounter hypocrisy, deceit, and a cast of self-serving, boastful characters, forms the core of the American chapters. Themes of selfishness, hypocrisy, and the dangers of unchecked materialism are central. The American public, still smarting from American Notes, reacted with fury, and Martin Chuzzlewit initially sold poorly in the United States, a clear indication of the backlash against his perceived betrayal. Dickens, however, remained unrepentant, believing it was his duty to speak truth to power, regardless of the consequences to his popularity. Yet, despite the controversy and the bitterness of his American experience, this period also saw the creation of one of Dickens's most enduring and beloved works, A Christmas Carol. Written in a furious burst of creativity over just 6 weeks in late 1843, the novella was a direct response to the social conditions he observed both at home and abroad. Deeply concerned by the plight of the poor and the indifference of the wealthy, Dickens crafted a timeless tale of redemption and generosity. The story of Ebenezer Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, is a powerful narrative of transformation. Visited by the ghost of his former business partner, Jacob Marley, and the three spirits of Christmas, past, present, and yet to come, Scrooge is forced to confront the consequences of his avarice and isolation. His journey from a hardened, self-centered individual to a benevolent, joyful man embodies the spirit of Christmas and the potential for human change. The novella explores themes of charity, compassion, the importance of family, and the social responsibility of the wealthy. Dickens used the story to issue a powerful warning, embodied in the allegorical figures of ignorance and want. Two wretched children revealed by the ghost of Christmas present. This boy is ignorance, the spirit declares. This girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom. A Christmas Carol was an instant success, selling thousands of copies and becoming a cultural phenomenon that not only redefined the modern celebration of Christmas, but also served as a powerful call for compassion and social responsibility. He hoped, as he wrote, that it would strike a sledgehammer blow for the poor, and it did. Having navigated the tumultuous waters of his first American tour and weathered the storm of public criticism, Charles Dickens returned to England a more seasoned, albeit somewhat jaded, international celebrity. The experience had solidified his resolve to use his literary gifts not just for entertainment, but as a powerful instrument for social commentary. The period between 1844 and 1850 would see Dickens further refine his mastery of the serial novel, producing works that delved deeper into the human psyche and the complexities of Victorian society, all while grappling with the demands of a growing family and an insatiable creative drive. This era was marked by a deepening of his artistic vision and a more profound exploration of human nature. Following the intense period of writing A Christmas Carol and the mixed reception of Martin Chuzzlewit, Dickens sought a change of scenery, a respite from the relentless pace of London life and the pressures of his burgeoning fame. In July 1844, he took his family to Italy, embarking on a year-long sojourn that would offer both inspiration and a much-needed break. The vibrant landscapes, ancient ruins, and rich cultural tapestry of Italy captivated him. He was particularly struck by the stark contrasts between the country's glorious past and its contemporary poverty, a theme that resonated deeply with his own observations of England. This period of travel led to the publication of Pictures from Italy in 1846, a collection of vivid travel sketches that offered readers a glimpse into a world far removed from the fog-laden streets of London. Dickens's keen eye for detail and his ability to capture the essence of a place shone through, showcasing his versatility as a writer. He described Venice, for instance, with his characteristic blend of wonder and realism. It is a city of dreams, but also a city of decay, where the grandeur of the past mingles with the squalor of the present. The following year, the family moved to Switzerland, where Dickens continued to write and reflect, absorbing new experiences that would subtly inform his subsequent fiction. These European sojourns were not merely holidays. They were periods of intense observation and intellectual engagement, allowing him to gain a broader perspective on humanity and society, away from the immediate pressures of his English readership. It was during this period of European sojourn that Dickens began to embark on a new phase of his literary development. His next major novel, Dombey and Son, serialized from October 1846 to April 1848, marked a significant evolution in his narrative technique. While his earlier works often featured episodic plots and a multitude of colorful characters, Dombey and Son displayed a more structured, thematic approach, focusing on a central idea rather than a series of adventures. The novel meticulously charts the decline of the proud, emotionally stunted shipping magnate Paul Dombey, whose obsession with his firm and his male heir blinds him to the love of his daughter, Florence. Dombey, a man of immense wealth and rigid pride, embodies the cold, calculating spirit of commerce that Dickens often critiqued. His tragic journey, marked by the loss of his son, the alienation of his daughter, and the eventual collapse of his business, explores profound themes of pride, commerce, the destructive nature of emotional repression, and the redemptive power of love. Through Dombey's eventual softening and reconciliation with Florence, Dickens suggests that human connection and compassion are ultimately more valuable than material wealth or social status. The novel was a critical and commercial success, solidifying his reputation as a serious artist capable of sustained narrative complexity and psychological depth. The culmination of this period, and arguably one of Dickens's greatest achievements, was David Copperfield, serialized from May 1849 to November 1850. Often referred to as his favorite child, this semi-autobiographical novel drew heavily on Dickens's own childhood experiences, particularly the trauma of the blacking factory and his father's imprisonment. It is a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story that follows the life of David Copperfield from infancy to maturity. Through the eyes of the orphaned David, readers witness the harsh realities of Victorian education, the injustices of the legal system, and the resilience of the human spirit. Characters like the benevolent Peggotty family, the villainous Murdstone, the ever-optimistic Micawber, a thinly veiled portrait of his own father, and the manipulative Uriah Heep became instantly iconic, each contributing to the rich tapestry of David's journey. The novel explores themes of loss, memory, social class, the search for identity, and the triumph of good over evil. Dickens poured much of his own soul into David, making the narrative deeply personal and emotionally resonant. He wrote of the novel, "I have in my heart of hearts a solemn belief that I have been doing good in this book." Its emotional resonance and narrative richness cemented its place as a cornerstone of English literature, a testament to Dickens's ability to transform personal pain into universal art. Beyond his novels, Dickens's entrepreneurial spirit found expression in the launch of his own weekly journal, Household Words, in March 1850. This periodical was a platform for a diverse range of content, including essays, poetry, and short stories, many of which were written by Dickens himself or under his close editorial supervision. Household Words allowed him to engage directly with a broad readership on a variety of social and political issues, extending his influence beyond the confines of his novels. It was a testament to his tireless energy and his commitment to shaping public discourse, providing a space where he could champion causes, entertain, and educate simultaneously. He saw it as a means to show how much of the wonderful, how much of the admirable, how much of the beautiful, how much of the instructive there is in common things. During these years, Dickens's family life was also expanding. He and Catherine would eventually have 10 children, a large Victorian family that brought both joy and considerable domestic demands. His home life at Devonshire Terrace and later at Tavistock House was often a bustling hub of activity, filled with children, friends, and literary colleagues. While his public persona was one of boundless energy and social engagement, the private man often struggled with the pressures of his immense fame, the financial responsibilities of his household, and the relentless demands of his creative output. The seeds of future marital discord, though not yet fully apparent, were perhaps being sown amidst this whirlwind of professional success and personal obligation. But the sheer volume of his work, combined with his active involvement in social causes and amateur theatricals, left little time for quiet domesticity, and the emotional distance between him and Catherine began to grow, subtly at first, but inexorably. The mid-Victorian period, roughly spanning from 1851 to 1857, marked a significant and profound shift in Charles Dickens's literary output and, indeed, in his very soul. The buoyant optimism and sentimental warmth that characterized much of his earlier work began to give way to a more somber, complex, and often deeply cynical vision of society. His novels became darker, more intricate, and more overtly critical, reflecting a growing disillusionment with the institutions and moral fabric of England. Simultaneously, the relentless pressures of his immense fame, the burgeoning demands of his large family, and an increasingly strained marriage began to take their toll, leading to a period of profound personal turmoil that would irrevocably alter the course of his life and art. This era commenced with Bleak House, serialized from March 1852 to September 1853, a sprawling masterpiece that launched a scathing, almost surgical attack on the inefficiencies and injustices of the English legal system, particularly the infamous Court of Chancery. The novel's central metaphor, The interminable case of Jarndyce and Jarndyce symbolizes a society suffocated by bureaucracy, legal wrangling, and moral decay. Dickens employed an innovative dual narrative, alternating between a conventional third-person omniscient narrator and the intimate first-person perspective of Esther Summerson to expose the intricate interconnectedness of all levels of society, from the highest echelons of the aristocracy to the squalid depths of London's slums. The pervasive fog that opens the novel, both literal and metaphorical, encapsulates the moral murkiness and social paralysis that Dickens perceived. The story weaves together the lives of numerous characters, from the impoverished Joe, who don't know nothing, to the aristocratic Lady Dedlock, all caught in the suffocating grip of the legal system. Themes of social responsibility, the failure of institutions, the corrosive effects of secrecy, and the interconnectedness of human suffering are explored with unparalleled depth. Bleak House was a powerful and ambitious work, demonstrating Dickens's continued growth as an artist and his unwavering commitment to social critique. He wrote of the Chancery, "It is a monster, a nightmare, a labyrinth of injustice where truth is lost and justice is a phantom." Following Bleak House, Dickens delivered Hard Times, serialized in his own journal Household Words from April to August 1854. This was a shorter, more focused novel that served as a fierce indictment of utilitarianism and the dehumanizing effects of industrialization. Set in the fictional Coketown, a grim, smoke-filled industrial city where every building was like every other building, the novel critiques a philosophy that prioritizes facts, figures, and cold logic over imagination, emotion, and human compassion. Characters like the rigidly factual Thomas Gradgrind, who insists on teaching only fact, 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 and the self-serving Josiah Bounderby, a boastful factory owner, embody the cold, calculating logic that Dickens believed was stifling the human spirit and creating a society devoid of joy and empathy. The story follows the Gradgrind family and their struggles with a system that denies human nature. Themes of the dehumanizing effects of industrialization, the importance of imagination, and the dangers of a purely utilitarian education are central. Hard Times was a powerful and timely commentary on the social and economic conditions of the working class, highlighting the spiritual poverty that could accompany material progress. Dickens, through this novel, passionately argued for the necessity of fancy and feeling in a world increasingly dominated by stark economic realities. His next major work, Little Dorrit, serialized from December 1855 to June 1857, saw Dickens return to the theme of imprisonment, both literal and metaphorical, with a chilling intensity. The novel's primary setting, the Marshalsea debtors' prison, was a direct and painful echo of Dickens's own childhood trauma, and he explored the psychological and social effects of confinement on its inhabitants with a deeply personal understanding. The story centers on Amy Dorrit, born and raised within the Marshalsea, who embodies quiet resilience and self-sacrifice. Her life becomes intertwined with Arthur Clenham, who seeks to uncover a family secret. Little Dorrit is a complex and often bleak examination of class, wealth, and the corrupting influence of institutions. It portrays a society where everyone, regardless of their social standing, is trapped by some form of metaphorical prison, be it debt, social convention, personal neurosis, or the rigid expectations of Victorian society. The novel's intricate plot and its exploration of themes like false appearances, the burden of secrets, and the pervasive influence of the Circumlocution Office, a satirical portrayal of bureaucratic inefficiency, marked it as one of Dickens's most profound and pessimistic works. He described the Marshalsea as a place where the prison walls were very thick and the iron bars very strong, but by the time I had been there a few days, I had found out that all the world outside was a Marshalsea too. While his literary output reached new heights of complexity and critical insight, Dickens's personal life during this period was increasingly fraught. The death of his father, John Dickens, in March 1851, followed by the tragic death of his beloved daughter Dora in April 1851 at the tender age of 8, plunged him into deep grief. These losses, coupled with the relentless demands of his career and the strain of maintaining a large household, began to expose the deep cracks in his marriage to Catherine. What had once been a loving partnership had, over 2 decades and 10 children, devolved into a relationship characterized by growing incompatibility and emotional distance. Dickens, a man of immense energy, intellectual curiosity, and a profound need for companionship, found Catherine increasingly unable to keep pace with his dynamic life. He felt stifled, misunderstood, and emotionally unfulfilled within his own home. He often complained of her mental indolence and her inability to engage with his intellectual pursuits, a stark contrast to his own restless, inquiring mind. This growing dissatisfaction, though largely kept private, simmered beneath the surface of his public persona. The man who so brilliantly depicted the inner lives of his characters was himself grappling with a profound sense of personal crisis. The themes of entrapment, disillusionment, and the search for genuine connection that permeated his novels of this period were not merely intellectual exercises. They were deeply felt reflections of his own evolving emotional landscape. He sought solace in long, solitary walks through London, sometimes covering 20 miles in a night, and in his passionate involvement with amateur theatricals, which offered an escape from the increasingly suffocating atmosphere of his domestic life. The stage was set for a dramatic upheaval in his personal life, one that would shock Victorian society and forever alter the course of his private existence, propelling him towards a decision that would define his later years. The year 1857 marked a profound and scandalous turning point in Charles Dickens's personal life, one that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of his domestic happiness and send shockwaves through Victorian society. For 2 decades, he had been married to Catherine Hogarth, a union that had produced 10 children and provided the outward appearance of a respectable, prosperous household. Yet beneath the surface, the marriage had long been deteriorating, strained by Dickens's restless energy, his insatiable need for intellectual companionship, and Catherine's increasing withdrawal and perceived inability to keep pace with his dynamic life. The emotional chasm between them had widened, and the stage was set for a dramatic and deeply personal rupture. The catalyst for this upheaval arrived in the form of Ellen Ternan, a young actress whom Dickens met during the production of The Frozen Deep, a play he co-wrote with Wilkie Collins. Dickens, ever the enthusiastic amateur theatrical, had cast himself in the lead role, and the 18-year-old Ellen, with her striking beauty, intelligence, and burgeoning talent, was part of the supporting cast. Dickens, then 45, was instantly captivated. Ellen represented everything he felt was missing in his life: youth, vitality, intellectual curiosity, and a shared passion for the stage. What began as a professional collaboration quickly blossomed into an intense, emotional, and almost certainly physical affair. The exact nature and duration of their relationship remained a closely guarded secret for decades, but its profound impact on Dickens's life is undeniable. The relationship with Ellen Ternan was conducted with the utmost secrecy, a necessity in an era where public morality was fiercely guarded, especially for figures as prominent as Dickens. Victorian society placed immense value on respectability, and any hint of marital infidelity could lead to social ruin. However, the strain of maintaining this secret, coupled with his growing alienation from Catherine, became unbearable. The domestic atmosphere at Gad's Hill Place, his beloved country home, grew increasingly tense. Dickens's frustration with Catherine reached a breaking point, exacerbated by his belief that she was an inadequate mother and an intellectual mismatch. He began to openly express his unhappiness, even going so far as to publish a highly unusual and deeply damaging public statement in Household Words and The Times in May 1858. In this statement, he denied rumours about his private life but implicitly confirmed his separation from Catherine, attempting to control the narrative and protect Ellen Ternan's reputation. This unprecedented public airing of his marital woes was a desperate attempt to control the narrative, but it only fueled speculation and scandal, damaging his carefully cultivated public image as a benevolent family man. The separation itself was swift and brutal. In June 1858, Catherine moved out of the family home, taking with her their eldest son, Charles Jr. The remaining children stayed with Dickens and his sister-in-law, Georgina Hogarth, who had long been an indispensable presence in the household, remained to manage the domestic affairs. The terms of the separation were harsh for Catherine. She was given a small allowance and effectively banished from her children's lives, a decision that drew considerable criticism from some quarters of society. Dickens, however, remained largely unrepentant, convinced of the righteousness of his actions and the necessity of his personal freedom. He felt liberated, as if a great weight had been lifted, and he plunged himself into his work and his new relationship with renewed vigour. The fallout from the separation was immense. Many of Dickens's friends and associates were shocked and dismayed, and some, like his longtime publisher Bradbury and Evans, sided with Catherine, leading to a bitter professional estrangement. This rupture prompted Dickens to sever ties with Household Words and, in 1859, launch a new weekly journal all the year round. This new venture allowed him complete editorial control and provided a fresh platform for his ongoing literary and journalistic endeavours, including the serialization of his next major novel, A Tale of Two Cities. This novel, with its themes of sacrifice, resurrection, and the brutal cycles of history, perhaps unconsciously reflected the personal upheaval in his own life. Following the tumultuous period of his marital separation and the public scandal that ensued, Charles Dickens channeled his immense energy and restless spirit into a new, intensely demanding endeavour: public readings of his works. What began as charitable performances soon evolved into a major commercial enterprise, transforming him from a celebrated author into a captivating stage performer. This era, spanning from the late 1850s through the 1860s, saw Dickens reach unprecedented levels of personal fame and financial success, but it came at a profound and ultimately fatal cost to his health. His body, already strained by a lifetime of relentless work, began to buckle under the immense pressure of these grueling tours. Dickens had always possessed a theatrical flair, evident in his early amateur performances and his vivid characterizations. The public readings allowed him to combine his love for performance with his literary genius. He would meticulously edit his novels into dramatic monologues, performing all the voices and actions with astonishing skill and emotional intensity. His first series of paid readings began in 1858, and they were an immediate, overwhelming success. Audiences flocked to hear him, captivated by his ability to bring his beloved characters to life. He was not merely reading, he was acting, embodying each character with such vividness that listeners felt they were witnessing the story unfold before their very eyes. The readings were a powerful, immersive experience, forging an even deeper connection between the author and his public. He described the experience with a mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. The work is hard, the excitement great, and the fatigue considerable. But the public is so good, and the money so plentiful, that I cannot complain. These readings, however, were physically punishing. Dickens would often perform for 2 to 3 hours, sometimes 6 nights a week, travelling constantly across Britain and later America. The emotional drain of inhabiting so many characters, coupled with the physical exertion, began to take a severe toll on his already fragile health. He suffered from lameness in his left foot, severe facial neuralgia, and bouts of dizziness and fainting. His doctors repeatedly warned him to slow down, but Dickens, driven by a combination of financial need to support his large family and maintain his lavish lifestyle, and an almost addictive craving for public adulation, refused to heed their advice. He felt an almost messianic duty to his audience, believing he was bringing literature to the masses in a uniquely powerful way. Amidst this whirlwind of public performances, Dickens continued to produce major literary works. A Tale of Two Cities, serialized in All the Year Round, from April to November 1859, was a powerful historical novel set during the French Revolution. It explored themes of sacrifice, resurrection, and the brutal cycles of history. With its iconic opening lines, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." The story, centered on the characters of Charles Darnay, Sidney Carton, and Lucy Manette, delves into the moral complexities of revolution and the redemptive power of love and self-sacrifice. It was a departure from his usual contemporary settings, showcasing his versatility and his ability to weave intricate historical narratives with profound emotional depth. The novel's stark portrayal of the Reign of Terror and its ultimate message of hope through personal sacrifice resonated deeply with readers. His next great novel, Great Expectations, serialized from December 1860 to August 1861, is widely considered one of his most perfectly crafted works. It is another Bildungsroman, following the life of the orphan Philip Pirrip, known as Pip, from his humble beginnings in the Kent marshes to his aspirations of becoming a gentleman in London. The novel is a masterful exploration of social class, ambition, love, and the often deceptive nature of appearances. Characters like the eccentric Miss Havisham, the beautiful but cold Estella, and the terrifying convict Abel Magwitch are among Dickens's most memorable creations. Through Pip's journey, Dickens dissects the corrupting influence of wealth and social climbing, and the enduring power of human connection and self-discovery. The novel's intricate plot, psychological depth, and poignant exploration of moral growth cemented its status as a literary masterpiece. Dickens, in his preface, called it a very fine idea, and it remains a testament to his mature artistry. On June 9, 1865, a catastrophic event further impacted Dickens's health and psyche: the Staplehurst rail crash. Dickens was travelling with Ellen Ternan and her mother when their train derailed. 10 passengers were killed and many more injured. Dickens, though physically unharmed, was deeply traumatized by the experience. He spent hours tending to the wounded and dying, an experience that left him with a lifelong fear of train travel and a profound sense of guilt, as he was convinced he had narrowly escaped death. The incident exacerbated his existing health problems and contributed to a growing sense of melancholy. He later wrote of the crash, "I don't know what to say of the horror of the scene. I was in the carriage that did not go over the viaduct but hung by a thread. I shall never forget the sight of the dead and dying." Despite his declining health, Dickens embarked on his final completed novel, Our Mutual Friend, serialized from May 1864 to November 1865. This complex and ambitious work is a sweeping satire of Victorian society, focusing on themes of wealth, social status, and the corrupting influence of money symbolized by the dust heaps of London. The novel features a vast array of characters, including the mysterious John Harmon, the manipulative Bella Wilfer, the benevolent Boffins, and the sinister Bradley Headstone. It is a darker, more intricate work, reflecting Dickens's increasingly pessimistic view of human nature and societal institutions. The novel explores the idea that money can both corrupt and redeem, and that true character is often hidden beneath layers of social pretense. It is a powerful and sophisticated work, showcasing his continued artistic growth even as his physical health deteriorated. He described the novel as the best I have ever written. In 1867, despite his doctor's strenuous objections, Dickens embarked on a second, highly lucrative but ultimately disastrous American reading tour. The tour was a triumph of popularity, with tickets selling out in minutes and audiences once again showering him with adulation. However, the physical toll was immense. He was constantly ill, suffering from a severe cold, exhaustion, and the worsening lameness in his foot. He often had to take opium to manage the pain and sleeplessness. His performances, though still brilliant, were increasingly taxing, and he pushed himself to the brink of collapse. He wrote to his friends, describing his condition. "I am going on with the readings, but I am very ill. I have a perpetual cold and am always hoarse. My foot is very bad, and I can hardly walk." He returned to England in 1868, a shadow of his former self, his health irrevocably broken. By the late 1860s, Charles Dickens was a man consumed by his own relentless drive. The public readings, while immensely popular and financially rewarding, had taken a catastrophic toll on his health. His body, once robust, was now racked with pain, fatigue, and the lingering effects of the Staplehurst rail crash. Yet, even as his physical reserves dwindled, his creative spirit remained fiercely alive, pushing him towards one final enigmatic literary endeavor. In 1869, despite his doctor's warnings and his own failing strength, Dickens began work on The Mystery of Edwin Drood. This novel was a departure from his previous works in several ways. It was conceived as a murder mystery, a genre he had dabbled in but never fully embraced as the central premise of a major work. The narrative was darker, more atmospheric, and infused with a sense of impending doom. He was meticulously planning its intricate plot, even visiting opium dens in London to research the novel's seedy underbelly. However, the mystery of Edwin Drood would remain forever unsolved, as Dickens would not live to complete it. His final public readings were a testament to his indomitable will and his profound connection with his audience. The Sykes and Nancy reading, a particularly harrowing and dramatic excerpt from Oliver Twist, was notorious for its intensity. Dickens threw himself into the performance with such ferocity that it often left him physically prostrate, his voice hoarse and his body trembling. Friends and family pleaded with him to stop, fearing for his life, but he refused, driven by a sense of obligation to his public and perhaps a desperate need to perform. These readings, while thrilling for the audience, were slowly killing him. On June 8, 1870, after a full day's work on Edwin Drood and a final dinner with his sister-in-law Georgina Hogarth, Charles Dickens suffered a stroke at his beloved home, Gad's Hill Place. He never regained consciousness. The following day, June 9, 1870, at the age of 58, the greatest novelist of his age passed away. The news sent a wave of shock and grief across Britain and beyond. The man who had so vividly portrayed life and death in his fiction had now succumbed to his own mortality, leaving behind a literary world in mourning and an unfinished masterpiece. Dickens had explicitly wished for a private, unostentatious burial in Rochester Cathedral. However, the nation demanded otherwise. Such was his stature and the depth of public affection that he was interred in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey, a place reserved for Britain's most revered literary figures. His grave lies among those of Chaucer, Shakespeare, and Handel, a fitting tribute to a writer who had so profoundly shaped the English literary landscape. Even today, over 150 years after his death, Charles Dickens remains a towering figure in literature. His stories continue to be adapted for stage and screen. His characters continue to resonate, and his critiques of society remain surprisingly relevant. The boy who emerged from the blacking factory, scarred but determined, ultimately became the architect of the Victorian soul, leaving behind a literary inheritance that continues to enrich and challenge us all. The mystery of Edwin Drood may never be solved, but the enduring magic of Charles Dickens's world is a legacy that will continue to unfold for generations to come.